a lot of our childhood obviously shapes who we are, but especially the knowledge that we acquire as children. Because we might grow up with a question for the rest of our lives until we're exposed to it, whether through education or other experiences that teach us or things like that.
Largely, when people talk about activism, things someone, oh, the person is carrying a placard and whatnot. I think it could just be as simple as, someone doing their very best for their communities and trying to make change wherever they find themselves, right? I realized that at about that time, 60% of Nigerians, you did not have access to electricity, like they'd never lit a bulb before, right? So I started to ask the question of, is there a way that we could leapfrog from fossil fuel, but also ensure that these people have access to electricity, but do it in a cleaner way? And the conversation of solar PV started to erupt. Now, how do we build solar PV in a way that incentivizes the community, the rural communities, the villages that have never lit a bulb before?
Certainly, create a warm and engaging introduction for your podcast. Consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and Andres Tamez. In today's episode, we have Deborah Fadeyi. She's an energy and sustainability leader shaping equitable transitions across Africa, Asia, Europe, and beyond. She leads decarbonization at Thames Water, founded REES Africa to bring solar power to rural Nigerian communities, and heads Vector Energy, tackling energy poverty with clean innovation. Welcome, Deborah. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So how did you find yourself in this kind of work? What first brought you into sustainability?
I like to say that my childhood experience developed the responsibility that I now bear. So as a child, I was exposed to the catastrophe of climate change, so flooding, energy poverty, and that kind of defined my trajectory into finding opportunities to decarbonize and to enable climate resilience. I like to share a very sad event where my childhood friend died from carbon monoxide poisoning from a petrol generator. I think we were about 5-6 years old as at then. I felt very helpless. I couldn't do anything. I just knew that she had died because she had a small generator put in the room by our parents who did not know any better. And then while sniffing carbon monoxide, which is obviously odorless, and there was no sort of awareness, she passed out in her sleep. So as a child, having to go through that, helpless, hopeless about that, it just left an indelible mark to say, you know what, if when I grow, I'm going to find opportunities to, solve for this. And the problem became complex as I, started to look at it even more critically, and got into university, for the very first time understood what global warming is. And then it all made sense, having to pass through these issues, energy poverty, flooding, and not being able to qualify it. But then it started to make sense when education was involved, and I then started to look at ways that I could make change. And one of the most deliberate ways that I started to do that was, if my childhood friend died from carbon monoxide poisoning, how many people across Nigeria are passing through the same, right? Can I develop a solution that could essentially fix for that 5-year-old girl that essentially passed through that? And I found something even more damning in that sense, because I realized that at about that time, 60% of Nigerians, you did not have access to electricity, like they'd never lit a bulb before, right? So I started to ask the question of, is there a way that we could leapfrog from fossil fuel, but also ensure that these people have access to electricity, but do it in a cleaner way? And the conversation of solar PV started to erupt. Now, how do we build solar PV in a way that incentivizes the community, the rural communities, the villages that have never lit a bulb before to use solar, but not just to light a bulb, but also for productive use? So for context, Nigeria is about 250 million people, right? And in majority of that population are youths. So I gathered youths across Nigeria, and we started to develop solutions for rural communities to provide access to electricity for them. And then my journey just essentially moved on from that, because government started to reach out, multilateral started to reach out to get my opinion about, how to provide just transition for communities and provide climate resilience. And essentially that's how I started. And now I work within Thames Water as Decarbonization Lead, but I'm still a social entrepreneur at heart. Like, I will find solutions, I'll find innovations that would essentially make people's lives simple enough to build some sort of climate resilience for themselves. And that's what I do with the other, side projects that I'm on. Take, for example, EcoWise, which is an innovation under Vector Energy.
Right. Okay. First of all, I'm really sorry. I can only imagine an experience like that. And it sounds very personal to you, the motivation of what got you into this world of sustainability. I'm interested in what the conversations were around the issues that you were looking at, because one thing is to be someone who is thinking of solutions, but then the bigger issue is convincing people that this is a solution or that this is even a problem. So is that something that you had to encounter when you started embarking on this journey?
Yes, absolutely. I think, for one, there is a point where passion would essentially take you to, and there is a point where, passion would stop, and things are, values like perseverance, having the mettle, having to be able to convince people, to lead people would go, right? And as I did mention earlier, I had to scout for, youths, with the same passion that I had, with the same burn that I had, to build solutions as this. And essentially what I found was that when you build solutions that people have had lived experiences about, right, they become the advocate of such solutions, and then they start to, create similar or even better solutions within their local communities, right? So far I've mentored over 2,000 youths, and there are a lot of youths doing amazing things out there in Nigeria, across the world, working in places, in areas where, feeds into climate resilience, feeds into global climate policies, basically advancing equitable climate solutions, and they're doing a fantastic job. So in as much as I started small and I started with that experience, I've just been able to find people that have gone beyond passion, but taking it as responsibilities, to build capabilities as practitioners and engage other people. So it's a gift that keeps on giving, based on the fact that I led from a place of responsibility as opposed to just, passion.
Yeah. Yeah. And having sort of that backing of the data, the science, the evidence, really, whether that's an interview or a testimony or just raw data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a hard one. And you work across many different contexts, basically geographical, but also I can imagine Nigeria isn't a monolith, and depending where you're working, the context will be different, the local community, those sorts of things. So what gaps do you see in current climate models when it comes to representing the realities of the global South or Nigeria specifically?
Yeah. So, as you did mention, I've worked across different continents, and I think what essentially adds value to the work that I do, either in decarbonization or sustainability or energy transitions, is the fact that I've got lived experiences. Oftentimes we find that the people pushing for equitable transition or just transition, they don't necessarily understand the realities of the people that they are developing the solution for, right? And I will take an example when there's a project that I worked on clean cooking, where we had a stakeholder engagement, and one of the conversations from there, because we from the way I see it, you would not exactly in that stakeholder engagement, in that wider stakeholder engagement, you would not want to involve a rural woman that cooks with firewood. You would see her as a beneficiary, but she's actually a key stakeholder in that room because she's got lived experience for that. And then we brought that the rural woman in, and the conversation changed, because the reason why they would cook their local dish with firewood, knowing fully well that it's detrimental to their health, detrimental to, their children's health, and so on, is the fact that they think that the smoke adds some sort of value or some sort of depth to the food, to the delicacy. Right. Yes. So we had to show them that, we had to create like a mini cooking scenario where, we cook the same dish. Yeah. They cook the same dish with clean cooking stove, and they did the same with their conventional method, right? Mm-hmm. And the food was even, for some reason, better. The clean cooked food was even better than, the conventional. So having to show them these realities, also kind of like deepens the conversation, but it also gets us to understand what their lived experiences are. Because like I just said, right, the only sort of challenge to them switching is the fact that they think that the food will not be delicious, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very critical to have lived experiences embodied within energy modeling. You can have in a model, you can have, especially when you're doing some sort of scenario modeling, you have the data, right? You have the data from a quantitative perspective, but you also have to also multi-layer it with the qualitative aspect, right? To ensure that you are making actionable policies and you're creating equitable solutions that benefit the people that you are essentially looking for them to adopt. Because if they're not able to adopt the solution, they tell you it's not working. And it's not even about the technology. It's the fact that you've not created ways, or you've not created mechanisms for them to be able to adopt the system. And that's why solutions must be co-created with the communities or the stakeholders that they're essentially built for in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're bang on with that, because coming in with a solution and kind of dropping it on someone's lap doesn't make the solution effective if you haven't explained how that works. But also insights like, we think the smoke makes the food better. You don't get that from a poll. That's only possible when you do direct engagement and you're chatting to people and they say that, right? How do you even ask that question? How do you even think about that question if it's not part of your lived experience?
Exactly. So that multi-layered approach needs to be factored into modeling, so that because obviously models help to define or redefine policies, so that it can make that policy robust enough for it to be adopted and actionable.
Definitely. And what's the process to getting it into policy?
Yeah, so I've worked on a couple of policy projects. So the way I see it, right, I would say that my entry into policy design and whatnot is a bit different from others. So it's better that I just share my journey. So like I did mention, my journey spiraled from me having to actively engage with the communities and build local solutions for them. And I became a voice as to that. And whilst I was doing that, I was also building capabilities. Of course, education is very, very much important. And then when I was able to get into, policy design and working for the government, working, with multilaterals, like IRENA, I did quite understand how, policy engagement and policy, design, essentially works, right? I would say that, if you actually want to get into policy, find ways to learn what, the steps could be, right? Because obviously it can be different depending on the level of expertise or your background, and then position yourself, through, there are different UN engagements. I think there is, for energy transition, there's the SDG 7 Youth Constituency. Find opportunities to, feedback into, consultation responses, either in your country or on a national level. Be very conversant with what the policies are within your country and how, you can essentially, contribute to, its delivery or, updates. I don't know how other countries work, but, there are, well, in the UK, there are consultations every now and then. And even within the role that I do at Thames Water, I still respond to, consultations, policy consultations by the government. And the reason essentially why a country like the UK would first ask, carry out stakeholder engagement, ask, for expert views or stakeholder views on different policy, consultation before they essentially, get enacted, is because they're trying to ensure that, everything is covered and inputs, such as, from wider stakeholder is also captured, and it's, the policy is robust and all of that. So, having to start really, I would say, do a lot of reading, find opportunities to, share, what you essentially think about the different, through different platforms, to share what you essentially think about policies and put yourself out there. Join, organizations such as the UN SDG 7 Youth Constituency. I know that there's a lot of opportunities for policies, response and, deliveries across this platform. So yeah.
And you wear many hats because it's not just policy, right? You were nominated or named 2024 Cardiff's environmental activist. What was that like? What's that journey in activism?
Yeah, so I think largely when people talk about activism, things someone, the person is carrying a placard and whatnot. I think it could just be as simple as, someone doing their very best for their communities and trying to make change wherever they find themselves, right? And in this case, in the for the environment, right? I've talked about just one part of, I like to consider myself as a person of many working parts. And that's because, up until recently, I used to experience climate anxiety. It's a huge issue for especially my friends that are in this space too as well. We've experienced it. It's not something that is largely talked about, but, it's something that is real, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about the scale and deliverability of net zero, of the challenge, having to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees, there's limited control or limited influence in that sense. As a person, you start to become anxious of what could essentially be delivered, and especially where, governments may not be moving as fast as, they're supposed to, and there's a lot of, obstacles and whatnot. But I've just tried my best to essentially manage it in the sense that I have different things that I do. So like, as I did mention, I work as Decarbonization Lead at Thames Water, and I am putting my absolute best to ensure that, we decarbonize, long-term commitments to 2050, short-term commitments, and try to find opportunities for us to, deliver, emissions reductions across the business, right? That is essentially my core, but that doesn't stop me from being an innovator, right? To take, for example, I'm working on a project called EcoWise. So basically it's in unlocking climate finance for solar developers. If you look at a country like Nigeria, right, and even across Africa, the World Bank and AFDB, as well as C4All, recently started a program called Mission 300, because reports have shown that we will not achieve SDG 7 by 2030 at this pace, right? So Mission 300 pretty much is to sort of drive not access to technology, because access to technology is not the problem, but access to finance to further subsidize access to electricity for communities and, countries that do not have access to electricity. And interestingly enough, carbon offsets play a huge role to, sort of channel the finance needed or the budget needed to be able to subsidize access to electricity, right? And this is one of the opportunities I'm exploring. And if you look at the challenge, right, it says net zero by 2030. It doesn't say true zero. What that means is that there will be residual emissions. And that residual emissions will be covered through offsets, right? There are several countries that are looking to, they've not yet achieved industrialization. They are looking at energy to be that engine that enables them to do it. Will they use fossil fuel to do that? We don't want them to do that. But how do we incentivize them to use renewables like solar, wind, and whatnot? So that investment from hard-to-abate sectors, such as aviation, construction, built environment, who have tried all their best to reduce their emissions, but they still have residual emissions, can buy the carbon offsets from countries that are implementing renewables, for instance, because there are other ways to, get offsets, and then take that finance, right, to further subsidize to their customers, right, or connect more people to electricity, or just scale, so to speak. So that is what EcoWise wants to do. So basically unlocking climate finance for solar developers. And we're hoping that, from the scenario modeling that we've done, at least 13% of the finance needed for a country like Nigeria to achieve 10 gigawatts of solar ambition will come from this offsets, this credits in itself. So what is missing is the data transparency and integrity for verifiers like Vera or Gold Standard to be able to, give a thumbs up and say, yes, this works. And also obviously streamline it in such a way that it is more accessible to smaller solar developers who have, mini grid projects that are less than 100 kilowatts and whatnot. And they're also able to get the money to essentially scale. So closing that gap of lack of data transparency and making the data bankable and verifiable is what that innovation does, right? And essentially that's one of the things that I'm working on. I know that it's going to be a game changer for, rural communities within Nigeria, and hopefully we can expand to Africa. Then with REES Africa, very much connected. I also run a climate sort of publication networks as well. We've got books that we write, we author for children to understand what climate change is, what they can do, just basically creating awareness. Because I feel like if I had known some things growing up about climate change, perhaps my journey would have been more fast tracked or a bit more different. But just basically having to educate children, catch them young is super important. And some of the books have been adopted into the Nigerian curriculum, right?
That's incredible.
To enable children understand and take it seriously. So
yeah, and it's right. Like, a lot of our childhood obviously shapes who we are, but especially the knowledge that we acquire as children, because we might grow up with a question for the rest of our lives until we're exposed to it, whether through education or other experiences that teach us or things like that. And I wanted to let people know that EcoWise was shortlisted for a prize, right?
Yes, it was shortlisted for the Earthshot Prize.
Incredible.
And we won the C4All Innovator Award in Barbados earlier this year.
Amazing, incredible. Yeah, so it's not just this abstract idea that you have, but like it's getting recognition, it's patented now, it's something that's moving forward, and we encourage people to keep an eye on it. Do you guys have a website that we should plug?
Yes. So that's
we'll add it on the blog.
Okay, super. It's vector.io. It's just as simple as that. We're also having a multi-stakeholder engagement in October. So if you're in Nigeria, it's happening in Abuja, you can reach out to us. We'll send you the details. But basically what the multi-stakeholder engagement is to increase the awareness on carbon credits. A lot of people hear the word carbon credit. In fact, I feel like it's overused. The word in itself is overused, but so many people do not understand how it works. Right. So first we want to break it down, get key stakeholders across, the solar and climate finance sector to come in, and have a sit down, explain, what it is, and also share the learnings and the progress that we've achieved on EcoWise. We've got stakeholders like the British Council, who are interested in, of course, in innovation, FCDO2 as well, different stakeholders that are looking to essentially see what the outcome of unlocking climate finance could look like.
Of course. And then if we circle back to sustainable energy modeling, can that help us better understand the trade-offs and pathways towards achieving global net zero targets?
Absolutely. And in that way, we're able to put in several or different instruments that will enable us get there, because, when we start to model, for energy, right, it's going to be an energy mix. Second is going to be, where will the money come from, right? Well, will the money come from to, capex these technologies, at certain periods, watch it, grow, right, into 2030, say midterm, long term into 2050, and then see what the emission benefits would look like. So there is need for some, commitment, or I would say financial commitments to enable the modeling. So whilst we build models, that show, the, pathway to 2050, right, we should also build in what the financials would look like. So we're not just looking at what technologies or what emissions reductions, would look like, but also what the finance would look like and what will be the split of finance. So one of the most recent, models that I've had the privilege of looking at is, there is in the modeling, the carbon pricing was also included. So if you continued with coal, what could be the carbon abatement cost for that, right? Is it a function of you continually emitting carbon, right? Still using cheap coal, but when the cost of carbon is being applied to it, what does that look like, right? Or if you were to continue to use diesel, when there's an opportunity right now to use hydrogenated vegetable oil, what does the carbon abatement cost look like, right? And then how does that essentially match up to the or sort of subsidize the cost of hydrogenated vegetable oil in such a way that when diesel or the proposed pricing of diesel goes up until 2050 because of the additional carbon tax being layered on it. You see HVO continually drop, or grid electricity continually decarbonize in that sense, right? So those are the kind of fresh perspective that we need to bring into the modeling to help stakeholders, finance stakeholders, government understand what it would look like and what could be the repercussions if we do not move as early as possible. Because the best time to decarbonize was yesterday. In fact, it was like in 2000, right? And the
we're
second
late.
best time,
Yeah.
we're late, pretty much.
And then, because you said you don't deal with climate anxiety anymore, and I am so happy for you and a little jealous. But in these spaces that you're in, especially in policy and activism and talking to people, stakeholder engagement, all this stuff, what gives you hope when it comes to achieving climate justice in this global space? What is the thing that you kind of hold on to?
I think right now, maybe I didn't get enough overview of what was happening like 5 years ago, but right now I'm much closer to where everything is happening, right? And what gives me confidence is when I see someone like me, like my age, essentially walk into the room and they are part of, the conversation, or part of the solution, or part of that design and whatnot. So it gives me confidence because I know that when the seniors retire, these are the set of people that will fill their position, and we are more than capable from by the looks of it, we're more than capable to and we are, being sort of propelled or being put on a pedestal to be able to do that. Not on a pedestal in the sense that we do not have the right qualifications to work, but we've been given the opportunity and we've sort of built ourselves to, occupy those rooms. I had not necessarily a conversation. I was invited to speak to a room of stakeholders, senior stakeholders in energy transition, basically the energy and climate space. And it was a gathering organized by International Energy Agency, and DESNIS. And one of my plea was that to essentially allow for intergenerational dialogue, in that sense, intergenerational capacity building, because obviously these people know a lot, but the seniors, not these people, the seniors know a lot, but they might not understand it the way that millennials or younger generations understand, and they might not understand the nuances that are attached to this. So we add our creativity, our exuberance, all of the things that makes us who we are as as our generation, as the younger generation, to the wisdom that they have. And now we're seeing that happen even more frequently. We're seeing that happen in this space where we have been given an opportunity to add more value and whatnot. So that sort of gives me confidence. And for the fact that I now have more tools and more more platforms to work with, that helps the climate anxiety, because then again, I know that if I do this way, if I'm able to push to certain things, I'm able to get buy-in, then this will become, a reality. And I totally understand that we can't exactly do everything, if that makes sense. We can't do everything, but having to also train younger generations invest in younger generations coming in. And this is what I'm also passionate about. I'm writing books to get across to younger children as well, so they are more equipped better than I am when I'm doing this. And finally, I think the world is there's still a lot to be done, but there is now this urgency. Well, I'm seeing, it feels like I'm maybe I'm just the only one seeing it, but I feel like there is now this urgency now that we are approaching climate, COP30, which is holding in Belém, Brazil. There's now this urgency to kind of like understand what we need to do to get there faster. Like, we know that there isn't time anymore. We've got like 4 years or so to 2030. So is it that we want to shift the goalpost, or do we actually want to achieve this? And then now people are starting to ask deeper questions like, okay, we've tried this way severally, like we've tried it over and over again. What can we do differently? People are starting to ask that question. What can we do differently to do that? And one of the conversations that have come up from that is that, do we actually need COP? Do we have to be having, COP every now and then? Even the emissions that is attached, that does that justify having to go to COP and do that, all of that? So people are asking questions, right? And it's also giving us the premise to kind of like think inward and say, okay, maybe there is an opportunity to do things better, or find ways to kind of like actualize SDG 2030. So yeah, really much looking forward to it. Let's see what comes out of COP30, because I feel like it's going to be the definer of what is going to happen in the next 4 years. We still know that governments have still not given their commitment, their finance commitment. I think it was promised 100 billion or so to still not giving the finance to help other countries achieve net zero. We're looking towards what COP30 would bring, because right now I think enough talks really having to get the finance to enable countries countries that do not necessarily have as much capacity to do what they need to do to be able to achieve net zero. And also, net zero will not happen in silos. Just because the UK or France achieves net zero, it doesn't mean that climate change will cease to happen in France or the UK. It has to happen globally, right? For the temperatures to come down. So we need to understand that. Whilst we create carbon budgets within national carbon budgets, we also need to understand that if for the global carbon budget, if it doesn't come down, then there is no net zero. So we need to avoid fragmented net zero. We need to.
Yeah, no, it's a team effort. And we had a guest on that said, you can do anything, but not everything. And sort of that feeling of, if you set your mind to it, you can do it, but not everything. Like you said, you're focused on your area of the issue, where your expertise lies, and every day you're closer to making the difference that you want to see in the world. And it's very nice how you kind of bring it back to that intergenerational thing, because it's what you wanted growing up. It's what you're doing now. It's the kind of conversations that you're promoting. I think that's so beautiful, because there's a lot we can learn from older generations. There's a lot they can learn from us. And then it's up to us to teach the ones coming after us. So it's all a cycle, right? Can't happen in silence, like you just said. So thank you so much. We're going to stay on for a bit longer talking about funding, finance, and leadership with Deborah. Thank you so much for being here. You can check out the blog at tangeliclife.org for more resources and to read more about all this interesting knowledge that Deborah is bringing to us. So once again, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Let's talk power, let's talk change, from rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong, we're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride, empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.